So I've come to you this morning to talk a little bit about hope. I'm a hope-filled person, not because that comes naturally to me. Maybe because it doesn't come to me naturally, I work on cultivating it. And I found that increasingly it's important to cultivate it. How many of you have ever felt hopeless without hope? Some hands go up. And how many of you have ever gotten through a period of hopelessness and felt that you had gained some wisdom somehow, somewhere along that way? Even that in itself could be a source of hope. You know, I had a long drive coming down from Asheville this morning and, of course, was listening to NPR, which is not a source of hope. And then I turned it off because I said, you know, I really don't need to do this right now. It's not that I don't need information, but I don't need to do that. I'm sorry, are you guys looking for something? To get some air going. That's a good idea. Does somebody know how to turn the fan?
No, it does not work.
Yeah. I noticed that they printed these on very stiff paper, so I will not be offended in the least to do that. Well, imagine that what I brought with me, though, is a little ball of hope. A little ball of hope. And I'm gonna pass this ball of hope to you. And Barbara, if you could pass it down the row. Becky, I'm going to pass the ball of hope to you. Ball of hope to you. Pass it on down. Okay, when you talk to people later, and you say, yeah, I went to my Unitarian Universalist congregation, and they gave me some hope this morning. You can get it out, you hold it up, and pass it on to them. Because I really do think there is some ephemeralness about hope. It's something that we can pull out of our pocket and generate. But a lot of times we forget this. And I think this is particularly important when we think, oh, wonderful. And people need to reorient it so you're in the axis of that flow. I understand. I think that'll help a lot. Thank you. Back in, I don't know, early spring, one of my favorite authors, Yuval Noah Harari, was writing in Time magazine, and he expressed the opinion that when it comes to climate change, we seem to have gone straight from denial to despair. And you might say that we've done that about other things, and I don't know if that's because of the advent of social media and worldwide communication, negativity, bias. Prominent in many of our minds these days is certainly not only climate change, but the war in Ukraine, inflation, violence. There's a long list. And we do, I think, at least I do ask myself, is there any hope? And if so, where does that come from? Why bother with hope anyway? I mean, isn't that just to put your head in the sand? Let's be realistic here, right? Unitarian Universalists, we're realistic people. But I think it is not to put one's head in the sand. I think particularly for Unitarian Universalists, we are people who can spread hope. And historically, we have been. We have dared to traffic in hope since the very beginnings of Christianity. That's when we had hope that this developing cult that would become Christianity could be different. That all people could believe in a common source, a common origin of one God and one love, and that salvation would be for everyone. Age after age, our religious forebears, our thought forebears, trafficked in that hope, the possibility that of tolerance, universal brotherhood, could become a norm rather than an exception. A few years back, my daughter, who at the time was 17, some of you might remember I had a daughter named Amelia, offered the sermon, the senior high school sermon, at our congregation in Asheville. And she wouldn't let me see it in advance. And I was caught by surprise at what came out of her mouth as she lectured us, her elders, and said, if you are not careful, and I think she pointed the finger at us, I don't know, maybe I'm exaggerating. She said, if you are not careful, you will raise a hopeless generation. And how many people do you know, in their ardor and their zeal to fix what is so broken in this world, are not fixing what's broken, but are actually spreading despair? I think about this a lot, because I worry I may have been part of this overshoot, this well-intentioned activism. For years, I was one of those people who sought to bludgeon people, bludgeon the unbelievers with the piles of ever-growing data and predictions of the dire consequences should we not repent our carbon-spewing ways. I was personally trained by Al Gore. I spread the gospel of inconvenient truths between 2007 and 2017. I gave lots of talks and presentations as part of the Climate Reality Project. Maybe some of you have done the same. There's trainers all over the place now that do this work. It's good work. And to be honest, I'm not ashamed of it. The fact that an overwhelming majority of Americans are finally worried about climate change can really be seen as a measure of success on that front. And yet, has there been an overshoot? Earlier I quoted Yuval Noah Harari from his article in Time magazine, and the fuller quote that came from was an article called "The Surprisingly Low Price Tag for Preventing Climate Disaster." He said, a few years ago it was common to hear people deny climate change, downplay the enormousness of the threat, or argue that it's far too soon to worry about it. But now many people say it's too late. The apocalypse is coming and there is nothing we can do to prevent it. Despair is as dangerous as denial, and it is equally false. In that article, he presented what I thought was compelling economic evidence about the investment and the great returns for the investment that come from addressing climate change. However, if you read below the article and look at the comments, you'll find that he was pilloried by those who lean more toward the apocalypse is coming talk. How dare he speak so glibly in tone? Doesn't he know the apocalypse is coming and there's nothing we can do to prevent it? Shame. Well, Harari is no slouch. He's the one that wrote that book, Sapiens, that some of you may have heard of a few years ago. But I would ask of his critics, who are they that they really know the future? Who were the farmers' neighbors that they really knew the future? Some of you may have heard that little story that Barbara read so nicely before. I think a lot about incidents in my own life where I thought things were terrible, and they actually turned out to be blessings that came from them. Which is not to say that I know that climate change is going to bring blessings. But I know there will be winners and losers. And I also think that in addressing it, as human beings, we will be changed and we will solve many of the other challenges that we faced. So why is it, though? Why is it that we have what I would say is possibly an epidemic of negativity or hopelessness? Well, we all know that sells. Why does it sell? We are products of evolution, as our reading alluded to today. Oh, by the way, I have to say, as I was reading that, I was thinking about these new pictures that come from the Webb telescope. Has anybody had a chance to see those? Wow, humanity gone out to look at. Where's this first one? Anyway, what was I saying? Negativity bias. It's built into us because that's what evolution has done. We're the survivors. You know, the people that weren't paying attention to things that scared them or things that frightened them, they knocked off the evolutionary ladder a long time ago, probably even before they were humans. We, after millions and millions of years, we're the people that are like, look, watch out! Oh my God, someone's coming to get me. The problem with that is cognitive science has actually found that that shapes what we are able to do. When we feel under threat, as we might when we read yet another study about how terrible climate change has progressed, our brains literally shut down and get ready to run. We lose creative capacity. We often lose the ability to work with other people because we have to stay focused on the run, the escape. What would be possible if we saw that there would be great openings from addressing climate change? That kind of thinking puts us in a more creative mode. Makes us more open actually to what other people have to say, open to collaboration. You know, I think at its best, religion does preach hope. Not because it's some feeble-minded, head in the sand kind of thing. And I realize not all religions are created equal. Some are more equal than others. But at its best, religion gives hope, not because it has any particular line on truth, but because that's what works. We see multiple pathways to this. The Buddhists might say that by living in the present, we have hope. Because suffering comes from projecting about the future, which is really unknown. It's like in the farmer and the horse story. But we suffer because we spin out these possible scenarios. The people of the Abrahamic faiths might say that all hope comes from the one God, in whom everything is possible. We can be hopeful because there's a God that can heal, that can create miracles. And having hope is a motivation to be more faithful and to practice. Some may find hope in a life eternal. It's always kind of frightened me. It's another sermon. Why should we have hope as today's Unitarian Universalists or friends of Unitarian Universalists? As I said, because it works. Julie Merrick is a member of the Magic Valley Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Idaho. She has said that hope whispers that there is love and light and possibility present in this moment, and it calls our attention there. That's one of the ways that hope works, by calling where we attend to. Some of you might remember the 1960s humorist Jean Carr, who said that hope is the feeling that the feeling you have isn't permanent. For those of you who have experienced hopelessness and come through on the other side, you know, thank goodness that feeling wasn't permanent. It may yet come again, friends, but it doesn't have to be permanent. And that thought in action looks like this. A colleague of mine works in suicide prevention. She speaks of how a simple intervention can really support a people's change in thinking and in their trajectory. She says when someone comes in saying, I don't want to live anymore, her organization works with them to make a simple phrase change, to rephrase it as, I don't want to live like this. Did you catch that small two-word interjection there? I don't want to live like this anymore. Two words that add possibility that life could be different, that something can be better than nothing. And therein, I think, lies the power of hope. You say, fine, that's all very good, it's all very global about hope in general, but this climate change business is pretty serious. And it is, as evidenced by our sweltering warning. Of course, even back in the last century when I was growing up, we did have sweltering warnings. We and others have done a really good job, as I said, convincing people of the risks of global warming. do think an overshoot has happened. Combined with the pandemic, so many people now feel doomed and hopeless. There's this epidemic in depression, particularly among our youth, which worries me, in fact, more than climate change itself. And having won this battle on, is climate change really happening front, maybe, just maybe it's time to switch tactics, to find a new strategy to win the climate change war. And that strategy, I would suggest to you, fellow Unitarian Universalists and sympathizers, is to cultivate hope. Both a simple and yet courageous action in the face of people who will say, don't you realize what's really going on? Change. A world leader who I had the privilege of doing a study with last year, world leader in organization development, David Cooper-Ryder, created an approach to problem solving, which is collaborative and joins every voice to be part of it. He says to look for what's already working and build on that. David Cooper-Ryder has said, let us dare. Let us dare. We must be about seeing possibilities. And we must be about recognizing that it's possible. It may not be probable, who knows, but it's possible a good future could happen. Not because we know it will happen, but because if we see that as possible, that will literally change our brains and how we operate in the world. This vision of a good outcome, a good possibility will call us forward. And so I know there's all kinds of definitions of hope out there, just like there's all kinds of definitions of prayer and definitions of church and definition of religion. But my definition of hope is just having the ability to say that something is out there that is better than nothing. A good outcome is possible. Just leaving open that doorway. It was over 30 years ago that Dr. Martin Seligman discovered that dogs, after a certain number of unsuccessful tries to achieve a treat goal, like press with their nose to get something, if they had a certain number of tries and no matter how many times they did it, they didn't get the treat goals, they would give up. He coined this term, learned helplessness. They would give up no matter if, after that, the treats were offered. Fortunately, Seligman didn't stop there. He flipped his research. And he started to research something that he called learned optimism. Seligman then went on to become the father of a new shift in psychology. He was the president of the American Positive Psychology Association. He ushered in a new generation of brain and psychological research whose fruits we are only just beginning to see. It has helped me to understand how so much of our creative abilities to solve problems, a desire to engage with others and hear from them, rest on what we believe. Our one finding is how a vision inspires change. In the pictures we make in our brains, we look for these in the outside world. It's not the opposite way. I thought about starting this sermon with, what gives you hope? I think that's a great question, what gives you hope? And that allows you to focus on something. But what if you can't think of anything? We're all different people with different experiences. It's for each of us to find inside ourselves, to make a commitment to be hopeful, and then find the thing that will fit that. Because our brains start with our thoughts and our pictures. And then we find the things that fit. In 2009, the great environmentalist Paul Hawkins, if you don't know who he is, please look him up. He wrote a really pivotal book in the early 1990s called The Ecology of Commerce. In 2009, I have to find where I'm reading. There it is. He addressed the graduating class at Oregon State University and saying this: when I am asked if I am pessimistic or optimistic about the future, my answer is always the same. You look at the science about what's happening on Earth and aren't pessimistic, well, you don't understand the data. But if you meet the people who are working to restore this Earth and the lives of the poor, you aren't optimistic, well, you haven't got a pulse. What I see everywhere in the world are ordinary people who are willing to confront despair, power, and incalculable odds, and restoring a semblance of grace, justice, and beauty to this world. Here's some lines that could help you find hope, only if you're committed to finding hope in the first place. You know, it's a little bit like one of my favorite quotes from Ralph Waldo Emerson is, though I travel the whole world over to find the beautiful, I must carry it with me, or I find it not. We travel the whole world over to find the beautiful, one must carry it with us, or we find it not. And similarly, we can travel the whole world over to find hope. But as faithful Unitarian Universalists, this is our charge, to carry it with us, and to spread it, and to pass it on to others. Because who knows what might be possible if that's what we do.